and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to all of you here to the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London. Both to those of you with us in person here in the closed studio upstairs at the Opera House, and of course to all those of you watching around the world via YouTube. My name is Kasper Holten. I'm Director of Opera here at the Royal Opera House, and I'm delighted to host tonight's Inside event, especially because we are talking about one of my all-time favorites, Richard Strauss's wonderful opera, Der Rosenkavalier. We're in the middle of the final rehearsals for a major new production by Robert Carsen, due to open here at the Royal Opera House next Saturday. So excitement is high and palpable, and we are tonight going to get a few insights into this piece and into the new production coming up. We have, despite us being in the middle of the final rehearsals, managed to secure a fantastic lineup for you tonight. We have Professor Margaret Reynold from Queen Mary, University of London, talking about the creation of the opera. We have the conductor, Andres Nilssons, coming to talk about the music and also to demonstrate via some excerpts with select artists. We have the stage director, Robert Carsen, coming to talk to us about his thoughts about the piece, the rehearsal process, and this new production. And to talk to us about the wonderful, complex, and interesting role of the Marschallin, we have the delightful Renée Fleming, one of the world's biggest opera stars, coming to talk to us here tonight. We would love to hear from you during tonight's event, so if you have any thoughts and you feel like sharing them on Twitter, please make sure to use the hashtag ROH Rosenkavalier. The Rosenkavalier is a comedy, a delightful comedy, but it is much more than that. It is also a philosophical piece soaked in melancholy. It is a piece about an era coming to an end and a new era beginning in several different layers. The story revolves around the Marschallin. Whilst her husband is away from Vienna on official business, she has a young lover, the Prince Octavian. He assures her that he will always love her, but she says, of course, one day he will meet a young girl and he will leave her behind. He claims this could never happen, but of course, indeed, exactly this happens. He meets the young, delightful Sophie, he falls in love with her, and he has to embrace the future and leave the Marschallin behind. On the way there, they have to get rid of the brute Baron Ox, who is supposed to marry Sophie, and lots of comedy and intrigue ensues. And to talk to us about the major role of the Marschallin, one of the most complex and interesting, delightful roles ever written for a soprano, we have tonight with us one of the biggest opera stars in the world, Renée Fleming. Renée, I mean, thank you so much for coming because you're busy. We're in the middle of the rehearsals.
Yes, yeah.
Give us a taste of where are we just now? What happened today? You had rehearsals today, yeah?
Well, we're having stage rehearsals, so really in full costume, and of course we're testing out everything a little bit step by step. We're having an orchestra rehearsal we had this afternoon, and this is the final, really the final stretch. So this is where we're fine-tuning all of the details that make the thing come together and be absolutely something as special as we hope it will be.
I mean, I talked about the role being complex. We can come back to that, but the music surely also is complex.
Music is incredibly challenging. You know, I remember when
it sounds so easy and charming.
Well, exactly. You know, I used to get so frustrated when I studied in Germany, and people would come and say, "Oh, Rosenkavalier, Richard Strauss. Yeah, that's a little bit saccharine. That's a little bit." And I'd say, "You try learning Act One of. You try learning any of this music. It's so chromatic, very fast-moving, very rhythmic, and a tremendous amount of text."
Yeah. But at least it is a role you've done before, we can say.
Yes.
It's a role you've lived with for some years and done again and again.
Yes, 20 years.
What's it like to come back to a character like the Marschallin over such a long time?
Well, it's interesting because I sang several productions when I started out, and then I thought, why am I singing this? I can do this later. So I put it away and came back to it about 10 years later and did another sort of run, and then this is a run after that. So I've done sort of sections of it, but every time I come back to her, she's different. Right. She ages with me. in a lovely way, you know. Somebody asked me, and I said, you know, when I first sang her, I was just sort of in shock at the whole thing, and emotionally, everything hit me so hard. And now I'm jaded. It's like, yeah, of course you're going to go on. You're going to meet somebody else. Forget it.
But it's also one of the operas that has the most delightful libretto. I remember when I directed it years ago. I mean, many librettos are wonderful, but the text for the opera, it's like real drama, dialogue,
so
and so
rich.
intelligent and funny, and so many details. You can keep digging, no?
True. It's so true. And the depiction of this woman who's complicated, who leads a life that's very challenging for us to understand, because she's limited in many ways and yet also entitled, and the layers in this piece are so extraordinary, and particularly in this role. That's why it's my favorite role by far. I mean, it's because to play her is to really invest in myself and then to find the depth. And each time I can find new things. Each time I find new things. Today I found myself thinking, wow, do you know, she's doing this for him. I found a whole new take on a particular turn at the end of Act One.
How much of that do you feel is that you are the Marschallin, or you invest yourself, or how much of it is you looking at it like a separate thing? You know, how does that work?
Well, I think we're all the Marschallin. Anybody over 25 can relate to the fear of gray hair.
Most of the audience,
yes,
they can reveal, yes.
And no, I think that's why when I first did the role, the first time I sang the role when there were super titles, you know, I got such an outpouring of love from the audience, and it's because they understood.
You could feel the difference from singing it without subtitle. That's super interesting.
Huge. So I am myself. You know, I play her through the lens of my own experience, but I'm her, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So it's that kind of applying the sense of the feelings of loss that you've had, applying feelings of fear or hope or sadness or melancholy, or, you know, all of those kinds of experiences get seen through her eyes.
I mean, she is a melancholic figure in that she obviously has to let go, and she speaks in the first act. We're going to hear that later when our other Marschallin sings an excerpt from the first act, how she speaks about time running through the fingers like sand and not... Is she a sad person?
The images aren't... Well, I've played her manic depressive. I've definitely played her sad. And the music almost calls for that. And Robert is really pushing me in a whole different direction this time, Robert Carsen. And I'm loving it because it's a new challenge and it's fun to explore. I mean, it would be so boring to do things the same way.
Tell us about that. What is that new direction? We're curious.
Well, the new direction is really that she, as opposed to being, you know, as opposed to really resenting the Levée, to resenting Baron Ochs, she's having a blast. It's a big party. Act One is fun. Act One is delightful. And Octavian, of course, she's in love. She's, she's in that sort of bloom of the experience that she's having with him. And so it's a much more lively, and in a funny way, it's a younger Marschallin than I've been playing for a long time, maybe ever. And so I'm kind of loving that, you know.
That's fantastic.
And there's some interesting, it's just really interesting and unique ideas. I mean, Robert and I have worked together a lot, and it's, as usual, it's such a pleasure.
I'm assuming also with the complexity of the text and the rhythmic aspects, you must depend a lot on your co-actors, on the Octavian and the Ochs, the people you have to play with, right? It changes with them, or is it much the same?
It's like a very complicated puzzle, and if anybody's off, the whole thing falls apart. So yes, you are absolutely dependent. It's an ecosystem
and we don't have a prompter here at the Opera House.
No
so
prompter.
You're left to your own.
So, and you know, for me, it's the kind of thing you have to know it so well that when you push start, everything comes out without too much thought. So you're playing, when I do my best work, I am not aware of singing. I'm not aware that I'm in a foreign language. I'm acting, and I'm telling a story to the audience. And that's how I feel in this role.
One of the things I imagine must be weird about this role is, I mean, it's not completely commendatore in Don Giovanni, but almost, in the sense that you go on in the first act and obviously carry the first act. It's all about the Marschallin, and you are the red thread through that.
Right.
And then suddenly you disappear.
Yes.
You're not there for the second act, not there for most of the third act, and just come back for the ending where you have to let go. Is it not weird to sit in your dressing room and listen to the second act over the tenor and think like, well, you know, when am I going back on? Or?
Well, as a lyric soprano, I mean, the only other role in my entire career that's like that was Michaela, which I did once. So yeah, it is very strange, and it makes me so anxious, because if I sort of, you know, go off and think about other things or try to get something else done, then I panic. I have to
press start already.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you have to really stay somehow you have to be present.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult.
So my whole career, I have really wondered at the gift that we have in compromario singers, because they do that all their careers.
Singing smaller roles, character roles.
And they
right,
come on and off, and when they're on, and when they go off, they, you know, but I mean, there were famous singers who said they could go off and play cards, or they could come on and be singing a very tragic aria and doing their sort of grocery list. So I've always kind of wondered about that.
So you're not playing cards in the second act?
No.
We now know that. Okay.
No.
That's established.
No.
Can I ask you about the Marschallin? Who is she? If you would put a few words to her, who is this woman? How would you describe her?
Do you know, it so depends on the production and on the point of view and the moment, because she has authority, I think. You know, that was what I needed in the beginning, what I did not have. And I always listen. I do a lot of listening, and I try to listen to native speakers consistently, so I get what the turn of phrase sounds like.
The Viennese
Yes,
sound.
yeah, Viennese, or even just in the German language. And so it was finding that sort of innate authority was first. You know, what's it mean to have power? What does it mean to be someone who has status? You know, in being, you know, an American. It's kind of hard to relate to that. We don't even have royalty. We wish we did.
Surely, being a superstar, you
so
know what
jealous.
it's like for people to.
Well, you know,
draw on that experience?
in our career, yeah, but in my lifetime, we've spent our whole careers kind of convincing everyone that we're like everyone else. I don't think that's been too smart, actually. Hasn't served us well.
I can tell you, nobody at the Opera House thinks you're like everybody else. It's very clear when Renee is in the building. There's a real excitement. I don't think I give away too much, because we're going to see some model pictures later, and I'm going to talk to Robert. But in this production, compared to other productions I've seen of the Rosenkavalier, where the first act can be quite intimate, her bedroom, you have a feeling it's quite a private space into which the world comes for the levee.
Right.
In this production, you very clearly live in a palace, in a quite cold way. It almost looks like a gallery with paintings of generals and, you know, a massive space that doesn't feel like very private or intimate, but belongs to the world.
Right.
If doing it in that setting, does that then change your way of acting, the way the room, I mean, does the room influence your portrayal of the characters?
Do you know, I remember when I've toured some of the great palaces, and the bedrooms are in what looks to us to be hallways, you know, long hallways, and in fact people did greet them, you know, and the levee was a real thing. It is kind of challenging for us to imagine that you're having this whole toilette activity, and as people are coming in and trying to have business.
To your bedroom.
Yes.
And doing other stuff. And
So yeah, it is. It's just completely foreign. It's a foreign concept, but everything about this. One of the things I think is fascinating about the Marschallin is to imagine her through a lens of today, which is quite different, through a lens of when the opera was written, and of course when it was meant to be portrayed. And in each case, and you think about how women's lives have changed, and sadly how they haven't changed. It's quite fascinating. And then when you think about the fact that two men created this character, I just find it a wonder. I mean, I love Pauline Strauss. I just think Pauline Strauss. I want to see
You think she was behind it?
I want to see the opera. I want to play her in an opera. She had to have been a very interesting person.
That's a good challenge. Maybe a composer one day will write that piece. Who knows? I mean, because I must say that watching now the rehearsals, seeing you in that very grand space with no intimacy, with this opulent setting and with all these generals and war scenes hanging there on the walls whilst you're having an intimate
in a nightgown, right?
Yeah. That for me, that made it very clear that she's trapped in this world or put there, and she doesn't have any real freedom. She of course is free to do whatever she wants. You know, she has a lover, she has money, she can do, and yet there's no freedom in that space. There's no core of her there. So I would have imagined, certainly for me, that will influence.
It's lonely. I mean, I always think it's lonely at the top. So you have the loneliness of the fact that she is really on her own. And of course, the Feldmarschall is gone. And we see this today. We see this today with celebrities. I mean, Lady Gaga just did a whole piece on how lonely she is and miserable at the age of 30. And, you know, it makes sense. You understand it to some degree.
Renee, you've always been a very versatile personality. You don't just sing opera roles. You do. Tell us a little bit about the range of things you do in your life.
Oh my gosh, it's insane, you know, because 80% of my time is touring, is concertizing all over the world. I'm also a creative consultant for Lyric Opera of Chicago, which is a great joy. We are working hard on Chicago Voices now for the first weekend in February. And I'm also now artistic advisor to the Kennedy Center. And that's been a phenomenal new experience with Yo-Yo Ma. And I'm just loving this chance to give back, and by thinking about audience development, by supporting young singers, by thinking about how our art form, you know, can continue to really grow and move forward. I'm incredibly interested in new work. I just premiered a piece by Kevin Putz on the letters of Georgia O'Keeffe, which I think will have a substantial future life. At least I'm going to try to give it that, you know. But the other thing about this piece that I think is important, and I sing so, Strauss has been the desert island composer in my career. And when I visited his house in Garmisch, Christian Strauss, his grandson, gave me a private tour. And I had no expectation. I just thought, oh, this will be nice. This will be interesting. I was so moved and struck with each room. This is where he composed. And nothing has changed. Have you been there? Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Nothing. You know,
I'm certainly going now.
This is where he composed. This is where he played cards. Speaking of playing cards, and this is where he died, in this bed. And it had a huge effect on me. And I do know this much about Strauss. Anything I've done, nothing works without the orchestra. It is so much about the colors, the unbelievable orchestration, but also the transparency and the life. And Andres, oh my gosh, he's just brought so much joy to the whole thing, the way it sounds, the way it sparkles. So I think everybody's in for a treat.
Renee, on those words, that seems like the perfect finish.
Thank you.
The last time you were here, you gave us a fantastic Capriccio. It's a couple of years ago. Certainly one of the things I'll
another
never
one.
forget. So Richard Strauss, there we go again.
Thank
and
you.
now it's the Marschallin. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
so
taking
much.
time to come tonight. Renee Fleming.
Thank you.
And now coming back to the piece itself, we're going to hear from Professor Margaret Reynold from Queen Mary, University of London, to talk to us about the background, the creation of the opera. Please welcome Professor Margaret Reynold.
Thank you, Kasper. Well, that was amazing. Fantastic hearing about the Marschallin, whom we all love, and even more when it's Renee playing her. Center stage at the beginning of Der Rosenkavalier, there is a bed. Don't know if there's a bed in this production. We'll all find out, I guess. It's an homage to Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, one of the texts that stands behind the opera. Because if you remember, at the beginning of Figaro, Figaro himself is imagining the bed. He's been allocated a bedroom for himself and his bride, Susanna, and he's measuring it out, trying to work out where the bed will go. But the bed in Der Rosenkavalier has caused quite a lot of trouble. In 1912, so quite soon after the premiere in 1911 in Dresden, Thomas Beecham announced that he would perform the work in London. The Lord Chamberlain, who was then the official censor for the theatre, promptly stepped in. Either the bed had to go, or there was to be no reference to it in the text. Well, Beecham decided that he wasn't going to Bowdlerize Hofmannsthal's wonderful text. We'll be hearing a bit more about that later. So his Marschallin and Octavian appeared fully clothed, conducting themselves with upright propriety. In 1925, Hofmannsthal wrote a screenplay for a silent film of Der Rosenkavalier, directed by Robert Wiener. You can actually see this on YouTube. In this, there is a bed, but only the Marschallin is in it. She's in a state of undress. Octavian, fully clothed, is outside on the stairs to her Schloss, looking yearningly up at the window. You can see why this first bed is so important, and there are others in Der Rosenkavalier. In the third act, there's the bed where Baron Ochs hopes to inveigle Mariandel, Octavian in disguise, into complying with his wicked ways. And even at the end of the second act, the Baron stretches himself out on the sofa, imagining the delights of tomorrow's assignation. Mit mir, mit mir. But there is another prop in Act 1 that is even more important, the clock. Hofmannsthal's text, as we've heard already, is one of the best of opera libretti. When he was quite an old man, Richard Strauss advised the young conductor Georg Scholti to speak the words, and then you will find the rhythm. Hofmannsthal gives many beautiful lines to the Marschallin, but her key theme is time and mortality. At times, I get up in the middle of the night and stop all the clocks, all of them. While one is living one's life away, she tells Octavian, time is absolutely nothing. Then suddenly one is aware of nothing else. Strauss and Hofmannsthal's Marschallin is, of course, all of 35 at this point in the story, but she's setting the agenda on aging and loss. Rosenkavalier is billed as a comedy, but the Marschallin tells us that we must take the tragedies of loss and death lightly. All great art is a meditation on loss and death, but opera perhaps more so than most, because it takes place in time as we sit there for these 4 hours in the theatre, as the conductor holds the singers and the orchestra together in time. But this particular opera also suspends time. There are the 3 great still moments. In Act 1, as the Marschallin wonders where her young self, little Raisie, has gone. In Act 2, with the presentation of the Rose. And in Act 3, with the trio. And in between is all the farce and uproar of everyday life. The petitioners at the levee, the boorish ox and his unruly followers, the scheming of Annina and Valsacci, the clamping down of the law until the Marschallin arranges things according to a greater law. All these 3 sublime musical moments embedded in the ordinary are miraculous. And it's the Marschallin who only really sees it all. In the first act, she asks herself about her own transformation from young convent girl to the old Princess Raisie. How can our dear Lord make it so? And if he must make it so, why does he let me see it all so very clearly? The Marschallin may not appear in Act 2, as we've heard, but she is there, because she has already told us that she too was once what Sophie is. And in Act 3, she enacts what she had predicted in Act 1. Heute oder morgen, today or tomorrow or the day after that, Octavian will leave her for someone younger and prettier. Her 2 last words in the opera, and it's so moving, are nothing at all. They're offered in reply to Fanin's banal remark about the young people, and they are an affirmation and a blessing. Ja, ja, yes, yes. So what are we to make of Sophie against such competition? Well, to begin with, there's her name, which means wisdom. And Sophie is wise, because although she may not see the overall picture the way the Marschallin does, she does recognize the moment. In some ways, Sophie is us. She is the representative of the audience in Der Rosenkavalier. In the second act, when Octavian appears all in a vision of wife, it's Sophie who says at once, "This is so lovely," which is just what we will say. There is time and eternity in this moment of bliss, she says, and I'll not forget it till I die, which is what we will say if we are fortunate enough to see the right performance. And at the end in the trio, Sophie sees again, "I feel as if I were in church, holy and awed, and yet unholy too," which is again where we are, the audience, experiencing this secular consecration. 1 voice in the first act, in the Marschallin's Reverie on Time, 2 voices at the presentation of the Rose, 3 voices in the trio. Who then is Der Rosenkavalier in all of this? Right up until the premiere, Strauss and Hofmannsthal called this opera Ochs von Lerkenow. It became so much more than that comedy. In the early stages of composition, Hofmannsthal already had the idea to give the role of Octavian to a woman. It contains 2 big parts, he wrote to Strauss, one for baritone and another for a graceful girl dressed up as a man, a la Geraldine Farrar or Mary Garden. As it was, Mary Garden turned down the role. She had had enough scandal in her life and was worried about the implications. It's that bed in the opening scene creating the problems again. So Octavian is a woman. But in the story, Octavian is definitely a man, and a saucy young man, much more so than Mozart's Cherubino, even if he does dress up twice as a woman. But let's look at his names. Sophie gives us the whole list in Act 2. We know that he is Octavian, so he's 8th, one in a long line. Maria, the Virgin. Eichenreich, rich in honor. Bonaventura, blessed by fortune. Fernand, brave traveller. Hyacinth, the beloved of Apollo, whose tears at his death turned into the flower. And of course, Quinquin, his pet name used by the Marschallin in the first act, which is French for little child. Every variety of experience is vested in Octavian. He is male and female, young and old, an adventurer, a traveller, a fortune seeker, a fortune finder, a lover of women, and a baby. Later on in their joint career, Hofmannsthal and Strauss collaborated on Ariadne auf Naxos. It has a checkered, complicated composition history, but Strauss was determined that the key role of the composer should be played by a woman. Hofmannsthal was horrified. Your opportunism in theatrical matters has in this case thoroughly led you up the garden path. To prettify this particular character, which is to have an aura of spirituality and greatness about it, strikes me as, forgive my plain speaking, odious. For Hofmannsthal, the role of the composer, the role of the artist, was a spiritual calling not to be given to a woman. But he overlooks the fact that he'd already allowed Strauss to give that role to a woman. Octavian is der Rosenkavalier. He carries the rose, as his transformation underscores the whole performance. Within the terms of the story, it may be that he will turn out to be another ox, as the Marschallin says in Act 1, just as all men are. And the name Octavian is not so very far from ox. It may be that Sophie, in years to come, will be lonely, as we've heard, like the Marschallin, dallying with a young man while her husband hunts away from home. But for the space of the opera, Octavian is the artist, the performer, the trickster in disguise. It began as Ox von Lerchenow. It turned into Der Rosenkavalier. Some of us might think it ought to be called Die Marschallin. But think about this. There's not just one Rosenkavalier in Der Rosenkavalier. Octavian does indeed present the rose to Sophie in the second act. But at the very end of the first act, the Marschallin presents the rose to Octavian. Take this, she says to her servant, handing him the casket, to Count Octavian. Give it to him and say, inside is the silver rose. The Count will know. And this is what we all know. This is the story of her promise to youth, to regeneration, to new life, her gift of her profound understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret Reynold, for those wonderful insights into Der Rosenkavalier. And before we continue, I just want to remind you that we would love to hear from you tonight. So wherever you are in the world, feel free to tweet. And please remember to use the hashtag ROH Rosenkavalier. And now, to move from the text, the story, the plot, to what is, of course, at the core of Der Rosenkavalier, the music itself, we are talking to the conductor of our new production, Andres Nelsons. Welcome, Andres. Andres, you've had quite a day, haven't you?
Yes, exciting, thank you. Yeah.
A stage and piano rehearsal this morning, and then in the afternoon what we call a Sitzprobe, where the orchestra and the singers come together, but without the staging yet.
Exactly, yeah. So we had a wonderful stage and piano rehearsal, and now the orchestra Sitzprobe. So we are in, as Renee told, in a final move towards the premiere.
Does it feel like, are you nervous, exhilarated, tired?
You know, it's very interesting because the profession of conductor is generally very strange. I mean, because if I might say, firstly, my duty, of course, it's my mission to follow the Strauss amazing music and to, of course, to enjoy the music together with the orchestra and with the soloist. But that actually only for me starts when the performances start. So it's very interesting what Robert does. It's a very intensive, amazing work now, working on the details of the acting and on the characters, and it's very interesting. It's like, I think it's like a birth of the child. He does, and then he passes to, goes to the premiere, and from the premiere, then it's the child is born, and then it does some naughty things.
Well, you do continue. I mean, I've always felt as a stage director, we have to leave, but you do keep the remote control.
And that's, I think, where I wouldn't say the controlling, but when my part of fun starts, because I think it's very difficult to talk about music. It's exciting to talk about music because this is, I agree, it's also for me, it's one of the most exciting, I think, operas I probably love the most. But it's very difficult to put it in words because as very often, like Maestro Haydn has told, well, actually, we should listen to music. And we cannot really explain everything. And I think that, this is very much true, and I'm really glad that
that's a cue that's probably too good to miss, because we do have a number of singers with us tonight to give us a few examples, because we want to talk about what makes the score of the Rosenkavalier special. So we have a couple of excerpts. We've chosen to start with something in reverse order from the third act. The final duet between Sophie and Octavian, the two young lovers, talking about their love and their happiness. Something quite simple. Can you just introduce what we're going to hear? Yeah,
this is the very final love duet from Sophie and Octavian. So that's after Marschallin has said the most two important words. This yeah, and it's
letting go and giving their blessing.
And then they are giving the blessing, and then they sing these young, unexperienced in a way, and it's a beautiful, beautiful love duet. And I'm sure the audience will say, "Oh my God, yeah." So this is a beautiful, absolutely beautiful music. In a way, naive, but I think it's that presents kind of this idealistic. I think
the sweetness, the innocence of youth.
And the music is so
it's almost
sweet
kitschy, isn't it?
It's almost kitschy, but I personally think that there are moments in the Rosenkavalier, and including this duet ending. It's so beautifully sweet that I think we should not be shy. I try not to be shy, and I just go for it, and I encourage the musicians to enjoy that, because that beauty doesn't happen in life very often, you know. And I think to take this time
to celebrate it.
And when Marceline talks about time in a different perspective, of course, but I think this is a time when this young couple they need to take time and to enjoy, because that will not be the same in few years or in few days. So,
well, that's a very pessimistic outlook, Andres. To give us the first example from Rosenkavalier with the final duet, we have on the piano. We sadly couldn't fit the whole Royal Opera House Orchestra in here, but it's almost as good to have Christopher Willis from the Royal Opera House music staff with us on the piano, and we have Emily Edmonds and Keandra Howarth, a former and a present Jette Parker young artist here at the Royal Opera House, giving us Sophie and Octavian from the end of the third act of their Rosenkavalier. Please. Emily Edmonds, Kendra Howarth, and of course Christopher Willis with the end of the third act of Der Rosenkavalier. I think they're going to be in love for more than a few minutes, Andres. Don't take that illusion away from us.
So.
Who knows? If I remember correctly, you've conducted the Rosenkavalier once in concert. Is that right?
Twice. We have two times concertante version, which is very interesting because at first I thought it would not work in concert because it's very long and it needs an action and it needs
staging.
I think. But first time we did in Birmingham, and I was very surprised. It worked very well. The audience really. We had the great singers as well, of course, and they were playing, and the Ox was, you know, very
Finding
funny,
the drama,
and
yeah.
then they were laughing all the time, more than I think more than when they would watch in Mr. Bean or somebody. You know, it's really funny. And of course, recently we did it in Boston with one orchestra, Boston Symphony, and of course Renee was also part. It was really great honor and great pleasure to have Renee there as well. So, and as there also, the audience was really crazy. I don't know. It means that, of course, the music is so fantastic, and of course, but as it is very complicated. It's very complicated for orchestra, purely technically, as well as, of course, for singers. It's a great challenge for orchestra. Low C. It's very rarely who can, and of course, to have the bouquet of singers as we have now in this production is a great privilege. And
having done it twice in concert, I'm curious, is it different then for you? Do you hear different things, discover new things about it when you do it in a staging? You know, it's a different process. You sit there for more rehearsals and you see the drama unfold, or how does it feel like to suddenly do it staged now?
Yeah, well, I think I always look to the opera personally. So when I look to the symphony music, I influence from the opera because I think there is a lot of drama also in symphonic music, and on the contrary as well, when I look to the opera, I try to look it from the also more symphonic perspective. And for me, as Renee told, the importance of orchestra, of its instrumentation of harmonies, Strauss is a master of this, of course, is a huge dramaturgic partner in building this play, and therefore, if you say that the orchestra is only accompaniment function, then it would not work, I think, here.
So you have to think about it as theater, even when you do it in concert, in a way.
Yeah. So when I do it in the concert, I have to think as a theater as well, and there is the nuances of colors in the orchestra and in the voices is so huge, and I was telling the orchestra it's in the moment because it goes very fast, so I'm sure that it's very difficult because it's sometimes, and I told them it's almost like, you know, the comparisons is not really right, but it's like driving a Ferrari. You know, you go in, and of course you enjoy that. You have no speed limits, and sometimes you have speed limits, but you still go on with it. And then the brakes, and then and then it feels this kind of danger, risky feeling constantly. I mean, it's risky also for Marschallin and Oxter, or the relationship is very. So there is a lot of kind of this fun of taking a risk and doing something not what the society would think would be correct to do. So there's always a lot of naughty moments, and of course it's Vienna, so that says many things as well.
I'm sure also any member of the orchestra of the Royal Opera House watching will be very happy to be likened to a Ferrari. That's very kind of you. To demonstrate, we heard romance before, but we've also talked about comedy, and Richard Strauss's musical language being indeed complex and fun and fast.
Yeah.
We have something quite different, I think we can say. In the opera, there are two nasty characters, Annina and Valzacchi, who write the black newspaper, the Die Schwarze Zeitung.
We have lots of those, yeah.
Sadly, we know them in the real world too, especially in this country, where they are two gossip journalists and who are willing to sell their souls to anybody, any highest bidder. We have two extracts from the Rosenkavalier to show you something quite different. From the first act, we have Annina and Valzacchi offering their services to Baron Ox von Lerchenau. We have no Ox, but I'm sure we'll get the idea anyway. And then a very short duet from the second act where the two journalists are starting to create the news themselves as they attack Octavian and Sophie to reveal that the two youngsters have fallen in love. So with us, we are very lucky to have Helene Schneiderman and Wolfgang Applinger-Sperhacke, and of course, again, our wonderful Christopher Willis on the piano.
Gnade, att är bedürfnis, ich kan dela, ich kan besorgen. Ihre Gnade besitzt Sprüchen so unge wie eine Antike, eine Statue di Giove. Era Gnade, att det sker sig till Folge. Onkel und nicht zu zweien, machen alles besser, är es Empio. Gnade, att det är junge Frau. Gnade ist sin Eifersucht. Heute der Morgen könnte sein, erfahren oft, jede Wagge die Dame steigt, jede Brief die Dame kommt, wir sind da. Jede Wagge die Dame steigt, jede Brief die Dame bekommt, wir sind da, an die Ecke in die Kamin, wir sind da, in eine Schranke unter die Dach, an die Ecke, in die Wecke, wir sind da. Wird nicht bedauern. Cosa vuole? Sicher, sich meine Lichter wird besorgen, seien sicher ihre Gnade, wir sind da!
The intrigues go on now. It's another little intrigue.
Yeah.
Baron von Lerchenau, Lauf und wohl seine Gnade, schnell, nur schnell, ich muss halten dieser.
Lass dich die Feuer los, auf sie mir her.
Baron von Lerchenau, kommt zu sehen die Fräulein Braut, mit einer junge Kavalier. Kommen eilig, kommen hier, kommen eilig, kommen hier. Ecco,
Ecco.
Helene Schneiderman, Wolfgang Applinger-Sperhacke, and of course Christopher Willis, not just on the piano, but singing quite a feisty ox over there as well. Thank you very much. Andres, we've been so lucky that you've taken time to conduct several operas here at the Royal Opera House. You've conducted La Bohème, Madame Butterfly, Wagner's Flying Dutchman, but you've actually, the composer you've conducted most here has been Richard Strauss. You conducted Salome here in 2012, Electra in 2013, and now you come back with Der Rosenkavalier. Is that a coincidence, or is there a special affinity with Richard Strauss?
Well, I must say, this is, as I said, I think this is one of my favorite composers, and the thing is, each time you conduct, either it's Salome or Electra or like now Rosenkavalier, that becomes your favorite, and you love that the most. And I think in the Rosenkavalier, even though sometimes people say, okay, so in Electra and Salome, the composition technique and the dissonances, Strauss has moved much further on. And of course, there's a huge orchestra, and it's a lot of dissonances. There are at least several people
They can seem
killed
to be more modern pieces in a way.
They're in a way more modern, and it's more, the drama is very, many people are killed during the opera, so which is normal in the opera things.
Well, in Salome,
in Rosenkavalier,
really
it's not,
yeah.
it's basically, thanks God, no one is killed. But I somehow think that with all the beauty of this opera of Rosenkavalier, and the sweetness and sometimes, it's sugar and honey, you almost can, and I sometimes ask orchestra to really, to squeeze the honey out of that toaster, but
Is there a risk it becomes sentimental then?
I think there's a kind of a contrary to that I think, because the time when it was written, it was, I think, this kind of pre-war feeling in the world generally, because I think it's in a way trying to escape, to think about what is happening in the world. So it's in a way also to try to pretend that everything is fine. So it's, we are all fine and everything is, nothing will happen, but somewhere there,
the sense of
the
loss.
sense of, you know, it's like, and about this Zeit, which is Marschallin, I think it's not only her Zeit, it's actually the time which is running generally, more philosophically, you know, and so I would also make parallels. So it's, therefore, for me, it's quite dramatic, I find, and then these moments of interzet or many other in a monologue of Marschallin, it's actually very, I find, very dramatic as well as.
And so I guess in a way, if the Marschallin talking about time passing echoes not just her own getting older, but where time is going to go with the First World War.
Yes.
I mean, we live in a time where many people think, where's the world going? So does that resonate?
I think it also resonates, I think, very, very much also to nowadays, how we feel, we kind of tend to pretend, well, all is fine. It should be. We hope it will be fine. And so you see all the Christmas and it's nice, you know, Christmas markets and all this. But you know, there is somehow feeling, well, I'm not sure if it's, you know, it's going to be really as beautiful as we. So there is some kind of this factor I find in Rosenkavalier, next to, of course, all the great, you know, Hofmannsthal's.
So we've had romance, we've had humor, complexity, and now let's look at the melancholy, the sense of loss, the Marschallin being worried. Andres, thank you so much for taking time tonight to talk to us about this fantastic score and your work with it.
Thank you.
We're going to end this conversation with hearing a bit of the melancholy from the Rosenkavalier. We are lucky enough that we have not just one magnificent Feldmarschallin, we have two, because for 3 performances, the delightful, young, celebrated soprano Rachel Willis Sørensen will be singing the Marschallin, and she is with us tonight to give us the Marschallin's monologue from the first act about time passing, about the sand running between her fingers and not being able to stop it, so the loss, the sadness, the maybe slight fear of the future that Andres was talking about. Thank you, Andres, and Rachel, accompanied by Christopher Willis.
Lass die Uhren
muss man sich vor ihr nicht fürchten. Auch sie ist ein Geschöpf des Vaters, der uns alle erschaffen hat.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel Willis-Soundson. Thank you, Christopher Willis. And of course, thank you, Andres Nilssons, for taking the time to come tonight and talk to us. And I'm delighted to say that I've just been told that tonight's live stream is indeed being followed around the world, not just here in Covent Garden in London. We have people watching from as far away as the Philippines, from Moscow, and I'm sure Andres will be pleased to hear that people are watching from Boston, where, of course, he has one of his wonderful orchestras. Now, we've been talking about many other aspects, and we want to talk about the new production coming up here at the Royal Opera House, opening next Saturday. Someone who's very busy these days has taken time to come to talk to us tonight, the wonderful stage director, Robert Carsen. Robert, I want to jump right in, because we've heard two young people singing this beautiful romantic love duet at the end of the opera. Everything is great. And yes, there's this sense of loss, an era coming to an end, but it's supposedly very happy, isn't it? But you're setting the opera in the time of its creation, and that gives a different undertone. Why and what?
Yes, this production is set in 1911, the year of the creation of the work. Well, for many reasons. I mean, let's start with the music. I mean, this is, for me, an incredibly sophisticated piece of writing. Maybe the first postmodern opera, if you like, because Strauss and Hofmannsthal made a very active choice to combine various periods. The opera was written in the 20th century. It's supposed to be set in the 18th century. And Strauss has included an incredible amount of anachronistic 19th century music with the eternal waltz melodies that are truffled all the way through the piece from the beginning to the end. Most notably...
It's like the Spirit of Vienna in there, right?
Yes, most notably, but not exclusively when Baron Ochs is there, of course. And so it doesn't actually necessarily sound entirely 18th century. So I feel that the piece is very, and my colleagues, we feel very much, and indeed hearing Andres talk as well, and Renée, and everybody really, that there is a sense of the zeitgeist in this piece. It is very much a fin de siècle piece, a work about the past and the future, written at a very crucial time in Europe's history. I feel that Hugo von Hofmannsthal, one of the greatest poets of his time, and dramatist and librettist, because of course if he was always very important to him to be recognized as a writer in his own right, was very influenced by what was going on around him, notably of course Sigmund Freud and dream imagery. All of his works are truffled with long sections about dream. I mean, the Marschallin talks about dreaming that that her husband has returned unexpectedly in the night, but other dreams are mentioned in the piece, and famously in all his other operas, Electra, the first collaboration.
The third act almost feels like a nightmare to Baron Ochs,
Exactly.
a staged nightmare. No?
Frauen Schatten, etc., etc. So we've set it in this period where it is the end of the Habsburgs, the end of the period of the Austrian Empire as we know it, and what is with the sense of the divisions in Europe coming up and war looming. And I tell you, one of the things that led me to this very strongly are two details that maybe seem insignificant when you first see them, if indeed you see and notice them, but which to me are very, very important, axiomatic indeed. The character of the Princess von und zu Werdenberg, the Marschallin. The Marschallin is the term, she's a princess because her husband is a prince, but she's married to the Feldmarschall, the field marshal, the head of the Austrian army. This presence, this rather frightening presence of a man who we never see, but who she is clearly scared of, is an unhappy marriage, which she discusses herself. And then there is a second detail, which I thought also very important, which changes nothing in the story, but is very important, and in this production takes on great importance, which is that Sophie von Faninal's father, how he's made his fortune. He's one of the richest men in Vienna, and in the first act, when Baron Ochs is describing to the Marschallin, you know, talking about the young woman he's chosen to marry and how rich she is, and the Marschallin says, "I've completely got it, why you're choosing to marry this girl." And he says, you know, her father's one of the richest men. He supplies the army in the Netherlands. He's an arms dealer. So you have these two extraordinary facts that, you know, the Marschallin's married to the head of the Austrian army, and the girl, the father of the girl he's going to marry, is an arms dealer and has made a fortune in selling weapons.
And of course, setting it in 1911, I had a strong feeling watching some of the rehearsals gives you an incredible sense of loss, because you think actually at the end of the opera, the least problem that Sophie and Octavian might have in the future is that they fall out of love with each other. Actually, Octavian might end up on the battlefield a few years later.
Indeed, that is very much what I think. And in fact, the final duet, what they actually sing, "Ist ein Traum, kann nicht wirklich sein, dass wir..."
It's a dream, it can't be real.
It is a dream, it can't be real that we are together. And in fact, it is a dream, and this whole generation is going to be destroyed. And I think it's really important. But we've tried to somehow allow all the different periods to be present in the staging, because the set, if you like, in the first act is very 18th century.
I think we have a picture of it. Let's
yes.
see if we can call up the set.
So
that's where we start.
Yes, we start here, not entirely because we were worried that the censor would interrupt us if we had a bed, but there is a sense in the Marschallins, the way in which the Marschallin lives. She lives in this in this palace with a series of anterooms. We hear about them all the time. She keeps asking who's in the antechamber. Baron Ochs says he refuses to wait in anterooms. He's much too grand. So we wanted, with Paul Steinberg, the designer, to have a sense of these anterooms that lead up to her room. So we actually start. I mean, normally I don't like doing this, showing what the thing looks like before it's opened. You know, that's why
we won't tell anybody.
Exactly, thank you. But here we are, we're doing it. So we start, the opera begins in this, but this beginning of the anteroom, of which the rest of it is in the auditorium, soon rises. And as you see, we have the first of these military portraits. This is, of course, based on the Hofburg in Vienna, where the Habsburgs lived, a series of soulless red, white, and gold rooms, which are entirely decorated with military pictures.
And if anybody is thinking there has to be a bed, let's reveal the next picture.
Yes,
right,
there
Robert?
is a bed.
There's a giant bed.
There's a very, very big bed. And this is, of course, a photograph of the model. And so the curtain goes up, and we have this bed chamber, this rather formal lit d'apparat, as the French would call it, with these portraits around, and this very large bed. In fact, the real one's bigger than this. And portraits of the field marshal's ancestors all the way around the room. And, of course, with the field marshal himself with his hat and costume there above the bed.
Presiding.
This door that you see opens up to a series of other antechambers at the moment that the levee happens, and you see these rooms continue 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. And if you're lucky enough to be sitting in a little bit to the right of center in the auditorium, you will see right to the end of this enfilade.
It feels to me, when I watch the rehearsals, extremely oppressive that she's living in this, between all these pictures of war and generals, and in this room where everybody feels entitled to walk in. And as I talked to Renee about these massive rooms, there's no intimacy. Does that change the reading of the Marschallin then?
Well, I think she is trapped in this men's world. She has married into a sense of duty and royalty, if you like. Well, this is quite familiar, I think, to us in this country. And it's a question of doing her duty, which she is determined to do, and she does it beautifully. But there is a loneliness and unhappiness, and this beautiful woman in her 30s, apparently, having an affair with a 17-year-old boy, which is... You know, it's wonderful for her at the beginning, I think, having this boy who so appreciates and loves her, and even Baron Ochs, who pays her a great deal of physical attention. It's wonderful to be looked at in this way, the men appreciating her and desiring her in a way. Her husband is never there. We don't know what goes on, but it's clearly a loveless marriage, but which had such hopes at the beginning, as she says herself, when she is left alone with the rose and remembers her own presentation of the Rose, her own Rosenkavalier, and what it was like when she had hopes for her first marriage.
Can we
Or her early marriage, I should
talk
say.
about Baron Ochs for a second? That is an incredibly difficult role, of course. It's incredibly difficult music, but also it's a role where you easily fall into cliché land. What's your take on this oafish, brutish Baron Ochs who comes in from the country to marry the young girl and is...
I don't think he's oafish at all, and Richard Strauss didn't either. There's a very famous letter in 1943 in which he describes the character and says he's a sort of Don Giovanni from the country. I think he's got to have tremendous charm. I mean, he's overblown. There's a sort of, he's a fantasist. There's something vaguely sort of Irish about his imagination. I think he makes, if he doesn't get the answer, he makes it up. But it's all real to him. There's something also slightly Falstaffian about him, although he's not at all an older man. He's supposed to be in his 30s as well. And so I think he's delightful. Of course, sexually, it's appalling, his take on women, and how he thinks that they're all there like a fruit basket, but they've all got to be young, and they've all got to be virginal for him to get really interested. That's what he really likes, young, defenseless girls who are going to just be blown over by him and by his title. He's a tremendous snob as well. And but there's something delightfully honest about him, which you simply, I think the audience have to find him irresistible. And so working with Matthew Rose on this role, I've been really encouraging him as much as possible to have great fun in the role and not to...
Easier said than done with singing those rhythms and all those incredibly difficult and fast lines. And
yes, but that's how his mind works. So in fact, he's absolutely a constant... firework of, you know, becomes too much for all the people around him, but he's unstoppable, irrepressible, and ultimately, I mean, he can become tiring, but he's a real life force. And I think, you know, working on the scene with Renée, I was saying in the Marschallin's bedroom, you know, if you have to play all the time that you're so anxious, either that Ochs is going to find out that the maid he's really keen on is her boyfriend in disguise, or that she's bored of him, the Marschallin ends up spending 25 minutes looking, you know, unhappy and uncomfortable, whereas in fact, I think she should find him quite funny. And she's delighted by the wit of Octavian, that he comes up with this clever idea of escaping from her bedroom by dressing up as a girl to get out, because how can he be there as a young man?
And in fact, that's in the score, because in the end, it's Marschallin goes along with it and recommends Octavian, and so actually makes the game even more dangerous, right? Where Octavian becomes a bit...
Well, I said, in fact, it's her revenge that Octavian dresses up as this maid, Mariandel, but he has such fun that Ochs immediately, never expecting that someone's going to come in and fall for him, he just thought he would be able to get out in disguise, but Ochs immediately starts trying to pick her up and have a date with her. So Octavian, instead of leaving, I was saying to Alice Coote when we were working this, it was marvelous, a wonderful cast, and saying, you know, this becomes really fun. So the Martian who wants him to go then has to say and watch as Octavian has great fun with this. So to get her revenge on him, to pay him back, but it's all great fun. But she dangerously offers an image of him as he is in real life, the Count Rofrano, one of the grandest families in Vienna, as the bearer of the rose. And of course, Octavian saying, you shouldn't be doing this is too dangerous. Well, what he was doing was dangerous too, so the
Marschallin is quite playful. And of course, this whole game comes back to haunt Ochs in the third act, where he has this date with Mariandel. He thinks it's the chambermaid that he saw in the first act. You have chosen to be quite specific about where that's set. Is that fair to say? Spoiler alert again.
Yes, well, yes, I thought that in the third act, which is clearly anyway meant to be in a house of ill repute, when the police commissar comes in and he interrogates everyone present, notably Baron Ochs, and of course the Wirt, the landlord of this establishment. There's a bit that's famously cut, but we've reopened it, thanks Andres joining in on this, where he turns to the landlord, and when he sees this bed, and he says, what on earth is this doing here in an inn? And the Wirt tries to explain, says, well, you know, there's certain men of a certain rank who bring girls, and then after their meal, or maybe even after dessert, they start to, and the police officer won't let him finish this. That's enough of that. We'll talk about that later. So
let's have a look at the third
we have
act.
clearly set it in a brothel, in a bordello.
It starts in front of a wall again.
Well, there's a parallel, because I wanted the fact that the Marschallin turns up almost like a deus or dea ex machina in the third act to save the day. And in fact, Strauss and Hofmannsthal forgot to compose something in as to how she got there, but we think that Ox sends his bastard son Leopold to go and get her at some point, so that's what we do. I wanted to make a parallel between the bedroom and the whole way in which Act 1 works with Act 3. This is Act 1, we had the Marschallin in an 18th century setting. Act 3, we're in a kind of a 19th century setting, which is like the famous French bordellos, Le Chabanais, or the other ones in Paris, although there's a very famous one in Vienna as well, which still exists. So we start in this wall with all these different rooms which lead into all the chambers of delight, where Octavian is setting up his meeting. Of course, he decides to go into the big room, and we could go to the next slide. And here, of course, is our room with a parallel to the first room, but here where we had military pictures, we have this 19th century soft porn going on. And all this gilded nonsense furniture. And in fact, there is a bed. I don't know that we probably don't have another picture, I don't think, do we?
We have to imagine the bed, I think.
We have to imagine the bed. There's a bed that suddenly appears magically in the midst of all this. And of course, the second act, can I talk a little bit about that? I decided we thought it was more fun not to show you what that's like. But Farinal keeps going on about his new city palace, so we thought it was maybe interesting, the shock of the new, that he has engaged a modern architect of the 20th century to build his new palace. And if you remember, in Vienna, right opposite the Hofburg, Adolf Loos in 1910, well, between 1909 and 1912, in fact, built his famous Loos house, which the Emperor Franz Joseph hated so much when it was unveiled, around exactly the time of this composition, that not only did he refuse ever to enter the Hofburg from the second gates, which are next to this house, but he had all the windows of the palace closed, so no one would have to look at this modernist horror, the house without eyebrows, as he called it, because there was no decoration around the windows. So it's a bit in that direction that we've gone.
So this piece that people sometimes say maybe might be a bit sentimental, backwards looking from Richard Strauss is actually very much about the clash between the new and the old also in this production.
I think it's very much about the clash of the new and the old, and the new are going to win, and the old know that. But of course, when has there not been a time when people have not been concerned about the new rich, the new whatever, but it is very timely, the new brutality and the complete lack of understanding which menaces us everywhere, and of course, so it's opposite, this militarization which is coming up here. It was not at all our intention when we worked on this production, but we feel that, of course, our times are deeply worrisome, so something, even as this opera, written 105 or 6 years ago, I think has a very peculiar resonance, this social comedy.
I think it is not just the Marschallin who wants to sometimes get up in the night and stop the clocks and make sure time doesn't continue. I think we all know that feeling sometimes. Robert, Carsen, thank you so much for taking time and being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And now, don't forget, you can actually watch and listen to this amazing masterpiece here at the Royal Opera House, their Rosenkavalier, being performed from 17th December to 24th of January. You can find out the details, of course, on our homepage, roh.org.uk. Thank you to all of our guests tonight, Renee Fleming, Robert Carsen, Andres Nelsons, Professor Margaret Reynolds, Christopher Willis, Keandra Howarth, Emily Edmonds, Helene Schneiderman, Wolfgang Ablinger-Sperhacke, and Rachel Willis-Sørensen. Thank you to our wonderful audience here in the closed studio upstairs at the Royal Opera House, and of course to all of you watching around the world. Good night.